Hi, I'm Craig Fraser of Syndicate, and I'm here to introduce you to the second part of the 3-video series on automotive airbrushing and custom graphics. This part is the automotive airbrushing sequence on hood murals. And here we are at the hood. This is the hood that's off the Mazda Extra Cab that I'm going to do the mural on. The hood was previously painted, and after letting it sit for a couple hours for the paint to set, I then prepped the surface. The surface, because the paint was fresh, we didn't usually use sandpaper to knock the shine down with. I was able to get away with just using a simple Scotch-Brite abrasive pad. The one I use is the red Scotch-Brite, and it doesn't have, it's not so gritty that it'll actually leave scratches in the surface, but it's just enough to knock the shine off and give the surface a good tooth for the base coat paint to stick to. Now, as you see, the design that's on here is sketched out using a piece of chalk. I don't like using any wax pencils or anything that has any silicons or greases in it, like a grease pencil or Stabilo pencil, because it leaves a mark that even though after you wipe it off it may disappear, has a tendency of being reactivated by the clear later on, and you can see it, which is then the piece is ruined and there's nothing more you can do about it once it's cleared. So using this chalk right here, it not only sticks well to the surface and is tacky enough that it doesn't blow off when I airbrush, it is easily be removed using just water or simple DX pre-cleaner. Now, the airbrush I'm going to be using for this mural is a bottom feed airbrush. It's a new airbrush by Iwata, just came out, called the Eclipse, and it's a little bit new model form, designed mainly for t-shirts, but because of its non-O-ring design, it's very well suited for using urethanes. Using the bottom feed airbrush in the very beginning of the mural is necessary for the amount of paint I'll be shooting, so I don't have to continuously replenish the paint in the airbrush, and also for the volume. This bottom feed airbrush shoots a very high volume of paint at a higher pressure. Now, to start on this mural, the reason I'm starting with white is in the process system I build up from light colors to dark. If the hood was white, I would then necessarily start with the next color up. But using the white, I am going to literally re-sketch this entire design, replacing all the chalk and giving a good base or foundation to all my paint. It's not really important where to start. I'm just going to start right here on a little bit of the outline of one thing. It's kind of like a fireball ring. Now, if it looks a little sloppy or a little hazy, this is like a sketch. This is not final detail work. I'm just coming in and sketching certain points that once I wipe away all the chalk, I'll be able to see what I'm working with. It's very important when you're doing this to keep an eye on all your details. It's really easy to ignore certain chalk areas and airbrush around them, but then all of a sudden you realize when you're wiping the chalk away, you just lost half your design and you don't know where your reference points are anymore. So a good example, if this corner right here was going to be black and not white at all, I would still come in and just lightly sketch just a line right around here. Now, this is easily going to be dismissed when I come back with the black and hide it. But for right now, it gives me a reference point that I can see later after the chalk is all gone. The main thing I want to do is get rid of this chalk. The chalk itself is going to, if I leave it on here, will separate the paint, and you will definitely see it. Because it's a dissimilar material than the paint, it'll stick out a lot more as like a sore thumb. Now, as I'm doing this, I actually have two reference points besides this mural I'm working with. I have the photo of the original poster down here that my skull's sitting on, and I'm going by actually an original poster piece of a movie called Something Wicked This Way Comes. That was an adaptation of a movie by Ray Bradbury a number of years ago. I found the poster to be really intriguing. I liked the format of it and the balance, and it just had enough macabre and mysteriousness about it to make it look really interesting for hood mural. Plus, it left a lot of by using by knowing the book and the movie, I was able to add a lot of different things to it that the poster didn't have and kind of make it my own at the same time. Now, besides that reference point, I also have a design up here that I sketched, just coming up with the idea, changing the design around, adding a few more characters, changing some things to it, and I'll constantly refer to that one as well. But right now, on the white, the reference points aren't as important as the chalk. So coming in, like with this skull right here, the chalk had no definition, no detail. So I'm coming in, adding some of the teeth. I'm going to fog around the eyes themselves. The hard part about painting with the white is a lot of times you're actually going to be painting in the highlights, which means you're airbrushing in the negative. You're airbrushing around certain things that normally you'd be airbrushing in. Instead of painting the eye, I have to do the highlight around the eye socket in this one skull I'm working on. Again, remember, you don't need to come in and detail out the entire design right away. Like this watch fob, this watch right here, I'm just going to come in and lightly airbrush in approximately where the lid is on this little watch. I'll come in and tighten this up, and using some movable masks will tighten this detail up later. Detail is important. Otherwise, if you don't use any detail as you're airbrushing, as you continue on with the mural, your mural will have a tendency of getting very muddy. Now, the problem with that is that it's easy to keep on going from color to color and say, oh, I'm just going to ignore the details until I'm at the very end with my black, with my darkest color. Well, the best thing to do is kind of a halfway medium between doing too much detail, not doing enough, is just as you progressively build up your colors, like I will with the color process system, building from the light colors to the dark colors, you increase your detail at the exact same time. I'm just putting in a little bit of the detail on the roller coaster. It's right here. You see, as I mentioned before, I jump around a lot. This is important not only just to keep yourself occupied. I have a tendency of getting too focused on something, and before I know it, I'm spending way too much time on a certain area. I'll also, a lot of times, if I'm just drawing on something and working on part of it, I may get confused by a certain aspect of it. It doesn't look right. Well, instead of worrying about it and wasting time, I'll move on to the next subject right away. Notice how this airbrush can really blast the paint, at the same time get very fine detail. This is not just a combination of the trigger usage and the air pressure, but also, if you notice the distance, I'll hold the airbrush away from the surface quite a bit. Be very careful when you're airbrushing not to get too far from the surface. You'll end up getting a grainy texture. It's always handy every now and then to feel. See if you're getting this really rough, grainy texture. Notice how literally I just painted this one area here, and I'm able to wipe on it. It dries that fast. The difference between using waterborne paints and using these actual urethanes, they dry instantly. The paint I'm actually using in here is a two-stage urethane, or a base coat, universal base coat by PPG. That the paint itself is very dull when it's applied. If you look, it's not very shiny. This actual paint on the hood is base coat as well. When they say two-stage, it's because the first stage is the paint, second stage will be the clear coat. The one tying factor with all my murals is by using base coat, I must, of course, clear them at the end. But the nice thing about not having the clear involved in the paint itself is it's very fast drying time. I'm going to start working up here on the face a little bit. Notice I had this banner kind of flowing back behind the face. I actually had the lettering in here. It was from a nursery rhyme that was in the movie called "By the pricking of my thumbs, something wicked this way comes." It's just kind of a catchphrase that was more in the book than the movie, but kind of stuck with me. I decided to add that in. It wasn't in the actual movie poster. And that'll be actually added in a little bit later. I know I'm just going to focus on this face and actually using my reference point from down there to try and get the colors. Not really a color at this point, I'm just using white, but to get the highlights in on the face itself. Another nice thing about doing this white is I don't need to really be that careful around areas I know are going to be very dark later on. Like right here, the hat's going to come across here. Any overspray, any fogging I have is going to be obliterated by that hat. One of the important things to remember, though, is as you further along in the steps, this overspraying is not as forgiving. Much as when you're doing graphics on a car, the earlier graphics, you don't need to mask as much because all the graphics are going to be covered. As I build up my steps, I don't want any overspray to come over and ruin work I've done in the just in the past. Filling up a little bit of the detail in the eye. Remember, at this stage, you're mainly sketching. The nice thing about being able to sketch at this stage with the airbrush is you're not really held to anything. I can add things. You will, if you could actually see this entire design, and you will see it, of course, before and after, when all the white's on here, there'll be things that weren't in here on the chalk. I didn't sketch everything in here on the chalk. I don't believe in spending time literally reinventing the wheel by drawing your design 4 or 5 times in a row. The sketch I did was actually, because I wanted this to be very symmetrical, there is a lot of necessity of balance. So I'll take time doing masking studies and actually making everything balanced more than I'll be careful as in certain details. Like lettering. The lettering was put up here just for the spacing to see if I needed more banner to be shown. The lettering may not actually be in that same position when I'm done. This right here is, you can call it movable mask or a freehand airbrush template. It's made by a company called Art Tool. They have a couple of different shapes. I use these it gives you not quite a hard of an edge as you would get from masking tape, but at the same time not as soft an edge as you see here. Even though I can get very fine detail with this, it's detail that is singular in direction. If I want a sharp edge that fuzzes out, the best way is to use one of these. So I'm going to mask using this curve right about here to mimic the top part of that hat. I'm going to come up and show you how I'm going to bring the light source up into the hat. Now it doesn't look like much, so you pull it away, and all of a sudden you can start seeing the hat take shape. Now I want this area to be a little bit brighter than this. This is like the satiny band that you normally have on these top hats. I'm going to take the reverse, that one negative piece right there, saying it's a close enough curve, and hit it with a little bit of hot right there. That punches it out really nice. Coming up here, same thing, but not as much. I'm going to make it more dark up here. And also there's going to be some clouds in the background, some lightning. So I don't want to completely obliterate this hat with white. Remember what you're doing here, and remember I mentioned before with doing the lines, I may put a few little white lines on the edge of this hat. That is not because I want the edge to be white, that is because it's referenced for when I come in with the black later. Because remember, when you wipe this chalk off, you can't, it's not ruined if you lose your design. You can come back and redraw it. But at the same time, you're wasting time, and time is money when you're doing murals. Come along here before I lose that edge. Also be real careful when you're wiping your hand on the work, not to wipe off too much of your chalk. You end up losing a lot of your design that way too. Now continuing on the airbrushing, using the process style, I'm starting with the next lightest color, which would be yellow. This right here is an actual chrome light yellow made by PPG, a base coat. The difference is the airbrush I'm using now is an HPC top feed. Now the reason I switched from my bottom feed Eclipse to my HPC was for detail reasons, and also I can get much closer to the work since the bottle's not in the way. Now what I'm doing, by comparison my original reference photo, at the same time, just off the top of my head, building up the light sources, I'm coloring in some of the white and also going over some of the orange with this transparent yellow. This one ring right here is like a ring of fire, and I want to use that as actually a centralized light source. I mentioned earlier I had a light source up on top that was from the upper left down at a 45-degree angle. Well, this central ring will also create some nice light effects surrounding the entire area. Going to have it like the lights, whatever it's kind of breaking up right here. The edge of the ticket is like glowing like it's magical. The ticket itself is on fire. Another thing I'm definitely going to do with this yellow is, as you notice, I mentioned before how a lot of the airbrushing I was doing, a lot of the designs weren't actually chalked in. I didn't have any of this fire in here. It's just something at the last minute I decided to tie in the bottom of the mural with the rest of it, and I had some dead space in here. I came in and decided to create a fire motif, and I did that with the white. Now coming with the yellow, I'm adding body to the flames. I'm staying away from the very base. I'm leaving that white. The underside of the hood you can't see, because the base of a flame is the brightest part, more white. The yellow, I'm going in, adding more streaks. Being very quick, using very quick wispy dagger strokes to get a very natural flame look. I don't want this to be a rod style flame. It's going to be like realistic looking flames. As I build the color up on the flames, I'm also going to use the same yellow. Since the flames are now a light source as well as this ring, I have pretty much free reign on how I'm going to illuminate certain areas. I don't have to worry about everything coming from that corner. So I'm going to have part of this hand here, the underside of the palm, the creases you have in your palm are going to be shown in yellow right in here. Also, this one, there's like an eye in each palm. This one's kind of stitched shut. And it's going to have a little bit, the stitches slightly highlighted right there. Just like I did with the white, I'm going to be moving around the surface. Just because I leave this hand doesn't mean I'm done with it. I'm going to continue the flames over here. The way my easel is right here, if you have an easel, don't leave it in the one place at the same time while you're airbrushing, otherwise you'll have an arc of no paint there. As I'm doing the yellow, I'll move this hood over about 4 inches and get that bottom side. Right now, I'm not going to worry about it. And continue the flames to the outside of the hood. Notice the white stopped, and we go a little bit further than the white, and what this transparent yellow does is tones the orange. It's not as apparent as when I go right over the white. As I build colors up on this mural, I'm actually going to be eliminating as much white as possible. If I eliminate as much white as possible, when I come back with white at the end for the highlights and hot spots, the white will definitely stand out even more, considering all the white will be muted by all the paint I'm putting on right now. Now, right now at this point, all the yellow is done on the mural, and I'm going to start coming in with a red oxide toner. It's actually a 623 DMD toner made by PEPG. It has an orangish look to it, and I use it to actually start defining certain details. I'm going to come in here with the pupil on this one. Now, when I say I'm using a DMD toner, what this is this pure pigment. It doesn't have any base to it, any medium. So you need to mix it. It's got a little spitting going right there. It needs to be thinned out a little bit. When you mix this, you have to mix it with a balancing clear. Now, this balancing clear, once it's mixed into this DMD toner that PPG makes, it becomes a DBU base coat, which is that two-stage system I was mentioning earlier. Once it's mixed, it actually has a limited shelf life, and definitely when it's mixed with the reactive reducer, which is a thinning agent, as well as a catalyst that starts the drying process. You have to make sure you use it anywhere within 3 hours to 24 hours. It starts to set up really bad. As you see, I'm actually defining the beard now using this red oxide. It brings a real nice three-dimensionality to the face, hardening up some of the edges, defining the shadows. Because it's a transparent, I can get different effects over different colors. If I end up going over like a white area, such as right here on the edge of this hand, I end up with like a rustish brown. But if I actually go over like the yellow, I'll end up getting like a brighter red color. One of the advantages of using transparency. If I actually go over the original orange color, it gives me a very dark color. So I can use it to shadow on all the colors throughout here. I never use any direct browns when I'm shading for any flesh tones. I'll actually use a toned down red oxide with a little bit of white in it, and sometimes a little bit of blue for a flesh tone. To get actually any dark brown shading in any flesh tones, I'll use a violet. Again, a transparent violet, and going by the process method, the violet over a yellow gives you actually quite nice brown. Much as I did with the yellow, I'll skip around a lot, moving around, adding details. I'm going to come in here and then actually start defining this eye a little bit. If you notice, I'm using that same HPC top feed I was using before. A little bit more fine and detail brush than the Eclipse, not quite as fine as my 2mm version. Starting with the blue, I'm going to come in right around here, and I'm going to real softly start building up the colors. I added a pearl into this blue so that the light will cast off of it and give it a nice kind of a shine to it when the sunlight catches the mural. Now I'm kind of just fogging in right here. The blue is not going to be mainly for details. The blue is just coloring in this existing white, being very careful to stay away from any yellow areas. Now what I want the transition from blue to not go to green when it hits the yellow. I'm going to use a magenta to actually transition the blue, because when magenta hits yellow, it becomes a brightish red. When magenta is over the blue, a transparent magenta, of course, will give it a purplish look. So I'll be able to eliminate that green. Using my freehand stencil, I mask up the top area of the banner to prevent any blue overspray from getting on there and creating that green look. Darken in around the skull. Bring up the eye sockets. I also don't want too much blue on this orange. It has a tendency of getting a little muddy. You notice I fogged a lot of the white around the actual area that was orange earlier. Now this blue isn't going to remain this color either, because I'm going to come back with white later and mute it down. I just want the blue to be like a halo around this lightning. So notice I'm not being real detailed. The white's going to come back in and punch out the center of the lightning. I just want the blue to color it. So when I come back with the white later to do the center of the lightning, all you'll see is a little surrounding blue around the outside edge. Again, using the freehand stencil to mask it. The airbrush I'm using is still my HPC top feed. Coming in right over here, I use the curved area of the stencil to protect this part of the banner. Fog a little into here. Now I'm going to keep a little bit of the white showing. like right around here, because when I come in with magenta, I want the magenta to transition into the blue. I don't want to cover up all of my white. The biggest problem with working in color process is you'll end up falling in love with one of your colors and just constantly build up the color to an extent where all of a sudden you have no more, the only color left is that actual color that you're working with. When you do that, you're actually limited your colors in the future because all your basing from then on out will be that color. So it's always good to leave a little bit of the white, a little bit of the blue. Even when I come back with violet later, there'll still be some blue left over. We'll come in over here. Again, very important to use this mask. As I mentioned earlier, as the details get more and more tight with the mural, you want to be really careful about overspray. Overspray is very difficult to get rid of at these stages. Stage of the mural, I've already finished up all the blue. As you can see, the blue all throughout the background has been added in, and I've already started some of the magenta. The color I'm airbrushing right now is actually DMD 673 magenta. It's a quinacridone magenta, and it's highly transparent, so when it's over white, you can see it has a pinkish tone, yet over the orange it gets a real reddish tone, and over blue it gets a violet tone. So continuing the process system of building up the colors in the mural, I start airbrushing with this magenta. Now, I'm still using an HPC Iwata airbrush, but the one I'm using right now is my 0.2 millimeter. Now the reason for this one, this can get incredibly fine detail, as you can see like in the lettering right in here. I'm just going to punch in, add in this color. This color not only is going to brighten the mural up, the mural is getting very monochromatic with the oranges, and the blue kind of came right out at you and like contrasted the rest of the colors. And now this magenta I'm going to use to actually bring the blue back in with the rest of the mural. Notice how when I go over this blue on the skull, it darkens it and gives it a violet tone to it. Now I'm going to continue tightening up the details. The reason I switched this finer detail brush was because of the fact that as I go along, progressively getting to darker colors, I'm going to continually add more detail. Now, because of this finer detail brush, I also had to mix the paint quite a bit thinner. Some of the thicker paints are very difficult to thin down without becoming binder poor and actually getting kind of grainy in their texture. But the high transparent toners, such as the quinacridone violet as well as the quinacridone magenta, they're able to be thinned down very weakly. So if you actually look right there, I'm spraying full blast and it has very little effect. When it's thinned down, it doesn't have a good coverage, but all I'm doing is really just toning existing details and punching out the edges of them. Now the last color that we're actually putting on the mural before the black and white is going to be a deep violet. You see the color before that was the magenta. You can see throughout the area up in here how I went through the entire mural, bringing the magenta out to the outside edges of the original color. And then with the violet, I'm punching in the last details before the actual final airbrushing stages. Show a good example of the violet down here. When shooting violet over the red oxide and magenta, it almost gives the appearance of black. Not quite as deep. By comparison to black, if I had black right alongside it, you definitely see that it's not as deep and dark. But it actually is a safe way of doing up details without mudding up the surface. Black is good for punching out details, but the problem is if you use a little bit too much of it, you can really muddy up your entire design. Even thinned down so it's transparent black, black still just by nature is a true opaque. So what I'll do is when I do come in with black, I'll be only doing like slight shadows. Like on this one right here, the actual teeth, I'm going to be using, the cracks between the teeth, I'll just be using the violet on. I'll actually use my stencil right here to prevent any of the purple overspray from getting on the white. As I mentioned before, as you're punching out the details, you get further along in the mural, definitely want to watch out for overspray. The shield again giving a nice sharp edge without as much paint. Just freehanding the airbrush, I'm going to come in and punch out some of the beard around the face here. I want to leave a lot of the red and the red oxide and the magenta in there to give some color to the beard. The black is just showing actual like shadow cast between the actual hairs. Okay, before we get on to the last step of doing the black and white, I'm going to show you some of the techniques in mixing the paints for the airbrush. These are all Automotive brand paints. PPG is the main brand that I use. And the Deltron single stage, or two-stage paint, comes in the form of a toner called a DMD toner. And you have to mix that with a balancing clear, which is the DBX 695, in order to create DBU, which is Deltron Universal Base Coat. Basically a two-stage paint that needs to be cleared over. Now when mixing this, the average ratio is usually 1:1 for the balancing clear. But for an airbrush, you don't need quite as much balancing clear. So I recommend, when you're using this paint, to just probably fill up your bottle with maybe about 1/4 of an inch if you're using like a small 4-ounce bottle. And then with that, take your DBX 695 and probably not do 50. I'd say half as much to maybe only 1/4 as much. You only need about half as much as required for normal paint. Make sure you mix this up even before adding the reactive reducer. If you add reactive reducer right on top of the DBX 695 when mixing, especially with some of the high-strength transparents, you'll end up shocking the paint and you'll end up getting chunks and small grain fragments that will make your airbrush spit. Now, average, usually 1:1 reducer is used for automotive guns, but for airbrushing, you're going to probably need to add about 200% reactive reducer to it. A good rule of thumb would be whatever the requirements for the paint, for a paint gun, I'd say use twice as much for your airbrush. So we're going to add twice as much of this reactive reducer. Remember, too little is more than too much reactive reducer. You can always add more. And then make sure it's shaken up real good. I use these small bottles instead of mixing up very large areas. I very rarely will use an entire bottle when doing a mural. Now, this reactive reducer right here is PPG DRR 1170. Now, the 70 at the end right there stands for the type of temperature that you want to shoot at. It depends on whether or not the reactive reducer is slow or fast. Now, you have about a 5-degree variance when you're actually using this. So anywhere from 65 to 75 degrees, I'd recommend. It's not as picky when you're airbrushing as when you're painting because you're working with such small amounts of materials. But I definitely wouldn't go 10 degrees above or below it. Try and stick within 5 degrees. It's always a good idea. Now, the airbrushes that I'm using to do the murals are HPC Iwatas. This one right here has a little bit of a different back than my other one. I do that, it's the same brush with a different tip. I have the different back just so I can recognize my detail brush from my coarse brush. The difference between my coarse brush and my detail brush would be this one has a 0.3 millimeter tip, whereas my detail brush is a 0.2 millimeter tip. Now, the paint on this one actually loads from the top. It's got a nice cap on the top with a hole for a vent. Make sure it's never clogged. If it clogs, it has a tendency of blowing off and splattering paint all over your mural. But this holds approximately about ½ an ounce of paint. You just add it right in. Sometimes you can even add different colors to mix in the cup itself if you don't want to mix a large amount of it. Put the cap back on, and you can literally airbrush. Well, it comes out a little bit, but you can airbrush pretty much, side to side, and you're not going to get too much paint spatter. At least it's not going to pour all over your work. Now, this right here was the pearl I showed earlier that I used in some of the paints. I'll add these pearls, though you can't see them when you're airbrushing. Once it's cleared, the pearl itself will give a luminescent effect. Sometimes if you use a pearl in a similar color airbrushed over the same color that doesn't have a pearl, you won't see it until at a certain angle when the light hits it, it'll just shine at you, much as a ghost graphic would be. Now, this can give really neat effects, such as airbrushing certain things in clouds that you wouldn't necessarily see. As you walk around the mural, the light changes and you'll be able to see them. These are dry pearls. PPG makes a series of different colors. You can purchase wet pearls as well. I find the dry pearls are the best for mixing for airbrushes. Basically, you want to be real careful with this stuff. Too much of it will clog your airbrush very much. So like for about, I have maybe about 1.5 ounces, 2 ounces of paint in this bottle, I would just squirt a little bit in there. Hardly any at all. You can always add more, but the problem is if you get too much, you're going to end up wasting paint trying to reduce it down. Make sure it's shaken up real good. The bad part about pearls is because of the fact that it's a suspension. It's not a true mixture. The pearl will settle to the very bottom. And you got to be real careful with that, because if it settles to the bottom of your airbrush down in there, it'll actually end up clogging the venturi that the needle goes through. So after mixing up the black, we're going to get back to the mural and start on the final stages of the details, which is the black on the mural itself. Okay, on the last color here, which is actually black, I'm doing the final amount of details. You see through here, I've gotten some of the people in the carnival and, you know, interesting details in here, like people flying off a Ferris wheel. But basically, all of the details are really coming together now with the black. And as I move around the picture, I just slowly start consolidating all the colors and using black to push back certain items and at the same time pull forward other things. So right here, this skull right here has already been all done up in black. All it's missing is its highlights. Kind of come in on this skull over here and using the black to actually de-emphasize the eye sockets and bring forward the teeth and some of the details in it. Be real careful with black. As I mentioned before, black has a tendency of muddying up a design. It's a very good tool, but it's easy to go crazy with. Now this black is not even true black. It's incredibly weakened, which basically means instead of just thinning it down like 200% with reactive reducers, it's probably thinned down close to 400%. If you were to spray it on a white surface, it would take quite a bit for it to actually build up and give you some color, some actual, a solid black. I don't want a solid black because any overspray, I don't want to cover up any of my previous details. But the nice thing is I can come in just a little bit of black and give a nice, crack effect to it. If you thin it down too much, you'll end up actually getting a problem called, the paint will become binder poor, which means that your DBX 695 balancing clear is thinned down so much you cannot hold the pigment together. Well, if that happens, what will happen is the pigment will actually settle in your airbrush down to the bottom, not only cause clogging, but cause a form of spitting. Now, while sometimes the spitting effect can actually be beneficial if you want a stipple look, when you're in the middle of doing a detail, it's Murphy's Law, the stipple will happen right in the middle of a large white area where you don't want any black. I'm going to come in and detail the teeth. Any overspray or any spitting I get at this point is going to be eradicated when I come in with the white to put the highlight edges on the teeth themselves. Darken up the bottom area. Because the light source is coming from over here, this lightning, when I bring the white in later, will actually act as the main light source on this skull. I'm going to darken up these back sides that aren't directly affected. Even though there is lightning back here, it's not going to be directly affecting this side of the skull. Cast a shadow of that horn right there. Maybe cast a slight shadow of that one going across. Bring in some varied lines. I've already got the teeth drawn out in blue originally, so I don't want to completely, go back over and be redundant and redraw out all the lines. I want the blue to still be there. I just want the black to emphasize a shadow effect. Since this is like the back edge of a tooth, I want this to be completely black. So the blue there was kind of just there as a sketch element to remind me. I want it to be completely black, much as the back of the jaw is right here. Okay, here we are at the last stage of the mural, which is the actual highlights. As you can see, I've come in and started building some of the highlights from the left going over to the right side of the mural. Now, as I mentioned before, the highlights, much as the dark, are going to bring forward and recess back some of the details in the mural. But the whites especially punch out and make the design very tight. This area down in here, if it looks at all any different, is because I added a slight amount of yellow with white pearl. Now, the reason this was done was because of all the overspray of the colors, I was beginning to lose my light source, which was this golden ring right through here, which creates the yellow area of the fire and right around here reflected off of his suit. So by coming in here with the yellow, I re-emphasized it, and then with the white, re-emphasized like the little magic sparkle dots that are all over the area right in there. As you see, the electricity and all the smoke and the hair in here butted up against this banner brings the banner forward and recesses everything into the background. Now for the electricity, it's important to use a shield since I want a really hot edge right on the side of the banner itself. So using my art tool freehand stencil, I'm going to come in with my airbrush and begin doing the lightning. The lightning itself is very jagged, not unlike a crack in stone that you might airbrush. If you see some blow-throughs, which are the areas that are like kind of white, little holes in the middle, that's where the pressure is a little bit too high on the airbrush. It's one of the few times that those actually are beneficial. You want to look random and erratic. Much as electricity or lightning does itself anyway. Also doing very fine threads, practically dragging the airbrush across the surface. I want to create various strands of electricity. I want a lot of action, a lot of high energy up in this top area. Also, recheck and make sure when you're using the shield to recheck every now and then. Stop and check, because sometimes you'll slide off it and then you'll start getting like ghost shades where the paint will zip underneath the mask. I'm going to create a little smoke right here, just to emphasize this edge right here. Okay. Also, notice how I have this white along the edge in here. This shows a little bit of definition of the depth of the banner itself, gives it some actual thickness to it. Whereas I have a dark line down here, I want a white line to contradict that, to show this is on top, the light source is hitting this as well. And it shows some thickness to the banner. I already have like a double edge in here anyway, so all I'm doing really is just filling in that little line. With just not a solid streak of it, just random, like the light's just barely catching it every now and then. Again, coming up here where electricity is, notice there's a chip right up here in the hood. Electricity and a lot of little small details can hide things such as chips. Now in the long run, that chip is not going to be seen after it's cleared. This hood will be cleared a number of times, probably 2 or 3 times, and then sanded and buffed out, and that chip will be gone. Whereas if it was going to be a solid colored hood or a graphic through there, I'd have to actually repaint that area, maybe even fill it with some body putty. Using the freehand stencil again, emphasize electricity. Try and make it not all go in the same direction. It kind of goes in the same direction, but don't mimic the lightning over and over again. It'll end up looking more like a pattern, and the more you make it look like a pattern, it won't look like lightning anymore. Again, making with the smoke, rechecking my reference, and coming along, building up this white edge again, all the way around. Maybe giving it a hot mark right there, where I'm just pulling back and doing a fade. That shows just like maybe the light behind it's kind of like breaking through. And just by putting a few streaks like this in it, gives the banner a little bit of a translucent look to it. Okay, coming down to here, this skull, which is this one over here, notice the highlights I put on the skull itself, punches out the upper orbital ridges as well as the cheekbone and gives the skull some actual depth, where this skull here doesn't have those yet and it appears a little bit more flat. So being very careful. My light source is actually, I could take it from here or over here. I'm going to kind of use both, since because of the ring here and because of the lightning everywhere, I have multiple light sources, which can be kind of nightmarish, but also can really help you out in the fact that you don't have to constantly keep track of where your light source is. Again, just as I mask the banner, I'm going to mask that part of the skull to create a little bit of electricity coming up here. Though I do want some white edges on the skull. By doing that, it creates a little bit of a halo in that arc right there, and I can emphasize the skull without drawing a line around it. A little bit of reflection on the horn right here. A little bit, just a few little dots to show a slight reflection on the upper orbital ridge right there. Maybe a slight jagged line along this crack in the skull. Now notice, that's pretty much similar to a lightning. You know, just do it right alongside the crack to show the highlight right there. Many techniques can be used for different effects. Again, coming along the upper orbital ridge, notice how I just slightly, just a little bit of white. This white itself is DMD toner. Again, PPG 2-stage base coat. The difference is this is thinned down about 400%. This stuff is so watery. If you actually looked at it sprayed right here, you know, blasting it really doesn't have any consistency whatsoever. It's hardly even opaque. With all the airbrushing done, we're at the point where we're going to clear coat the hood. I'm here with Dion Giuliano of Cal Concepts, and he's going to demonstrate the clear coating of the hood for us. The first thing he's going to do upon clear coating is he's going to wipe the entire hood down with DX330 pre-cleaner. This acrylic clean removes not only silicons and waxes, but any oils from your fingertips, as well as any loose overspray that might happen to be on the hood itself. Though it's a solvent-based pre-cleaner, it doesn't damage any of the paint whatsoever. And if anything, is also a good way of letting you know if there's any imperfections in the mural, because by wiping it down, you can see any slight problems that may appear once it's cleared. After it's all wiped down, it's got to be allowed to either dry or must be wiped off. The clear will not adhere to the hood if the pre-cleaner is still on the hood. Now another thing, there's a tack cloth right here that we use once the pre-cleaner is dry to make sure if there's any lint around in the air to use this tack cloth. This will take off any lint or hairs that happen to have landed on the hood itself. It's basically real inexpensive and minor investment for the fact that it prevents any hairs from getting stuck on the hood. The kind of clear that we're going to use is Delta Clear. It's a new clear by PPG, known as DCD35. It's probably one of the best clears on the market. It has one of the highest solids contents of clears. Goes on really nice. You don't need a tack coat with it because it goes on so thick you can just do 2 medium wet coats and it's equal to about 3 coats of normal clear. Now what he's mixing with it now is DT1875, which is a VOC compliant reducer. The 75 is for the temperature. You have, just as in the reactive reducer, a 5-degree variance upon clearing. And then the catalyst he's adding is DU5 hardener. Now the ratio he's using it to is 2:1 to 1. The Delta Clear being 2 parts, 1 part reducer and 1 part catalyst. Using a stir stick, make sure you get all the clear well mixed up. Should be able to clear an entire hood with 1 pot. This right here is considered a pot. And though this pallet goes on a bottom feed siphon gun, Dion prefers to use the LPH 94 Iwata, which is a gravity feed gun. The gravity feed has an advantage over a siphon feed in the fact that you don't need a high pressure to suck the fluid out. The gravity knocks it right down in there. You notice he's using a filter. This is in case there's any impurities that were in the clear or anything happened to fall into the clear when he was mixing it. This will get rid of them all. Make sure that the clear going into the system is going to be completely free of any contaminants or dust. Now, speaking of contaminants, we have a desiccant drying system back there on the wall. Now, it's kind of an expensive system that removes water as well as oil and any contaminants that may be in the air hose or coming out of the compressor. Though not everyone can afford a system like that to dry the air and purify the air. Anyone can afford one of these. These go for like approximately about $6.95. Usually you hook them on right at the base of the gun. A lot of people will use these in conjunction with their systems if they're not operating properly. They're disposable. As soon as the crystals inside here are an amber color, you throw it away. This one actually is used. Normally the crystals inside are dark, but these can be reached at any paint store. Now Dion right now is going to take that tack cloth I showed you earlier, make sure no dust in the area is landed on it. You don't want to press real hard. There is an adhesive on this cloth, and if you press hard, it may adhere to the hood and cause a problem with fisheye or an area where the clear won't adhere real well. Let me move this table out of the way for him to clear. Adjusting the pressure, he's going to blow the clear through the gun and slowly start going over it. Normally this would be a tap coat, but with this DCD35 clear, this coat is the medium wet coat. The reason it's laying flat right now is due to the fact that it's a mural. Murals are a little bit different to clear than a normal hood because there's a very level of paint, therefore you have to really load a lot of clear onto it. Normally with hoods we hang them up to clear them, but with this one we're going to apply the first coat of clear while it's laying flat, and then as soon as it's dry, like in about a day or two, we're going to lightly color sand it, hang the hood back up, and clear it again. Notice the mask Dion's wearing. He's wearing a dual cartridge disposable respirator. Highly recommend this. Because of the isocyanates that are in these high solid clears, these are nerve toxins, they're very dangerous. Respirators are definitely mandatory. I highly recommend a dual cartridge respirator that is rated for organic vapors. A number of companies make them. We're using a 3M disposable cartridge right here where the entire mask is disposable. 3M also makes masks where just the respirator cartridges are disposable. Dion just finished the first medium wet coat. He's going to let it sit for a few minutes while the clear tacks up. The reason for this is you don't want to build up too much material at one time, otherwise you can end up with sags, runs, or what's called orange peel, which is an effect where the surface actually looks like an orange. It's bumpy. That's because too much material has been loaded up on the surface, and it forms the skin and starts wrinkling. Now, as it tacks up, it's going to start getting slightly tacky to the touch on the surface instead of being wet, and he'll be able to come in after 15 minutes and lay another wet coat on there. After that, we're going to let it sit for a day, and then tomorrow we're going to sand it and clear it one more time. But pretty much that's what it takes, entailed on clearing a hood, and I hope you've enjoyed this video. Thank you very much.